Sorry about that. Having a little technical difficulties tonight. I think we fixed it, but there was a few things going on there that I didn't expect. Um, so got a playlist queued up because I'm intending to be here a while. We're gonna start here with a Cthulhu. Sounds like the little ones doing things he shouldn't be.
Welcome back, Defenders. This is incredible. Ukrainian drones hit Lukoil's Perm refinery 1,500 kilometers from Ukraine. 2 days ago, Ukraine successfully struck the Perm pumping station and refinery, and this is a very impressive fire. But it wasn't good enough for Ukraine, so they went back the next day and they hit it again. Russia's Perm oil station struck for the second straight day by Ukrainian drones. And now the fire is much bigger, much more impressive. I'm going to share with you guys some videos, and if you want to hold your hands up to the screen, maybe this video will warm you up.
That was great.
That is so impressive. And you'll notice there is netting on the storage tanks, so the anti-drone netting didn't work. Anyone have any marshmallows? Because this is a very impressive fire. There's nothing these firefighters can do to put this out. It's just going to burn. Oil rain reported in Perm after Ukrainian drones set Transneft pumping station ablaze. This is the city of Perm, and you can't really hide this. This toxic air, this toxic oil sludge and rain is going to be coming down on the city, just like it's doing in Tuapse. And Russians are noticing. Now let me explain for you why this pumping station is so critical. This is where most of Russia's oil and gas comes from in the Western Urals. And this pipeline and pumping station is critical. This is where Perm is located on the map in western Siberia, and it pumps oil to the Black Sea, Tuapse and Novorossiysk. It also pumps oil to the Druzhba pipeline going to Hungary and Slovakia, and it also pumps oil to the Yaroslavl refinery north of Moscow, as well as the Primorsk terminal on the Baltic Sea. If Ukraine can knock out this node, Russia's entire pipeline infrastructure is crippled. This is devastating. So let's go to the bingo board, and we have a new entry. Up until today, the Perm refinery had never been struck by Ukraine. 1,500 kilometers deep inside Russia. This was the first strike, and I guess this counts as two, but I think for the bingo board, they're just going to count it as one because it was in like a one-day period. Here's what Zelensky says. A report by the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine says we have recorded an updated level of Russian export losses resulting from Ukraine's long-range sanctions. Specifically, the port of Primorsk down 13% in throughput, Novorossiysk down by 38%, Ust-Luga down by 43%. We believe these internal Russian figures may be understated. For our parts, we will continue the operation to reduce Russia's oil revenues and export volumes. This is insane that Ukraine has been offering Russia an energy ceasefire, and the Russians keep saying no. Let's follow up on the port city of Tuapse. This was the satellite image from 2 days ago. This is the part of the facility that had been burning the previous 2 weeks, and then the refinery proper was struck. This is a video as of yesterday morning, and this is some end of day stuff, guys. Like, I've never seen videos like this before of massive refinery complexes where I don't know how to describe this. Like, these fires are so big. And unfortunately, I think the fire is out. All the storage tanks that were hit burned off. So this is the before, and then this is the after. You can see what was primarily burning in this area were these 4 tanks located right here, and they're completely gone. Everything just burned off. Here's the latest analysis from Okogora, and you can see this is the export parts. These are the storage tanks that had been on fire the previous 2 weeks. Ukraine then 3 or 4 days ago struck the refinery. They hit these storage tanks. They hit 2 of these. And I'm sure there's other damage to the refinery as
Previously damaged was all of that. Destroyed.
a result of the fire. Repeated Ukrainian drone strikes setting Tuapse refinery ablaze has rattled Russian propagandists. Once taboo admissions that Ukrainian drones are doing real damage and that it will be hard for Russia to prevent more are now being aired in Russia, even by very pro-Russian or pro-Moscow public figures. Russians can't ignore this, even though there's restrictions on the internet, even though criticizing the government is basically illegal and you can be fined or thrown in jail. Russians are taking to Telegram, those still using VPNs, and they're saying this is outrageous. People are breathing oil. Cars are covered in black slime. It's scary to even take children outside, and they're still shutting us up about it. There are no proper shelters. Basements are no refuge. You're firing drones over residential buildings, which are now nowhere near the beginning. Why is Putin protected by 27 air defense systems in his private residence in Valdai, while Tuapse has far fewer? One person can't be more important than millions of other people. This poor Russian doesn't seem to understand Vladimir Putin. And this is the cleanup on the beach. I just think this is fascinating that Russia is using women to shovel up oil from the beaches in Tuapse. So I just want to quick show you these 2 short clips.
Это просто я хотела камешки пособирать, а там под низом она вся туда протекла.
Well, that doesn't look like a fun time. Let me share one more of these with you.
Смотрите, вот эта вот бочка, отсюда мы собрали вот тут и вот здесь. Это четверть была заполнена, остальное все мы дособирали вот с этого небольшого участка.
Women with shovels. Where did all your men go, Russia? Where are your men? Normally I read for you these clips, but I'm going to play this one for you, so there will be subtitles, but I want you to see and feel what the residents of Tuapse feel now that their city has been raining oil for weeks.
Мысли понимания, что это уже настоящая война. Что это просто не игрушки, а настоящее, боевое действие, можно так сказать.
Это ребенок.
А что это? Что это?
Это нефть. Вот она была у нас, когда бочка взорвалась, остается, и теперь она может быть на машинах, так везде может.
Дышим
ей еще.
Даже вот на нервах не спим, час ночи сидим, ждем гостей. Вот так и живем. Ничего хорошего нет.
Как мы в подъездах стоим, когда бомбежка идет, это не жизнь вообще. Так что нам не повезло. Когда-то нам завидовали, что мы живем на море, сейчас нам никто не завидует.
Oh, boo-hoo. She's sad because other Russians used to envy her. Because she got to live in Tuapse on the Black Sea coastline where it's warm. Oh, she could brag to her friends and family and feel special about herself. And Ukraine ruined it. Ukraine's so terrible. They could just end the war, guys, but they don't want to do that. So it's going to get worse for Russia. Ukrainian drones hit Russia's Mi-28 gunship and Mi-17 transport chopper 150 kilometers from the front lines. So this is maintenance occurring on these two helicopters, and they thought they were safe. They thought they were so deep into Russia. I think this is the Voronezh region, that Ukrainian drones wouldn't be striking them in the middle of the daytime. But they were wrong. So let me play for you the first part of this. Each one of these helicopters is worth about 16 million, and I'm sure after these drone strikes, they're not going to be flying anytime soon. So this helicopter actually had maintenance occurring on it. You can see the mechanic working on the rotor. I can't show you the moment of impact because I don't think this mechanic survived. So we're going to jump forward, and then I'll show you the second helicopter being struck. And you can see maybe there's a mechanic or a pilot who saw the drone coming and then got out of the way. So the helicopter, that was a clean hit. Neither of these are going to be flying anytime soon. And Russians are furious because they're being told, why are there all these internet restrictions? Why can't we use Telegram? Why can't we use, common Western apps or YouTube? And they're being told the internet restrictions are to stop drones. But then why are these drones still flying to Perm and flying around Voronezh? So the internet restrictions aren't helping at all. This Russian says it's no longer possible to comment on all this within the framework of complying with the laws of our country. Something is different, guys. I manage like 12 social media platforms, and I do monitor the comments everywhere. And going back 6 months ago, I was still deleting and banning maybe a couple dozen comments a day from people who support Russia, and they've all gone silent in the comments section. I don't receive any hate comments anymore, and there's nobody saying that Russia's going to win this war. This was a funny meme, but Russians don't even try to prove they're winning the war anymore. They just stare at you like this. As the price of food in Russia goes up, as the body count goes up, as their refineries continue to burn, Russia is losing this war, and they all know it now. Ukrainian drones reportedly strike Russian explosive plant in Nizhny Novgorod. Not really an impressive video to show you, but this is a chemical plant that Ukraine struck last night, and Potentially significant damage, but we don't really have any pictures or videos showing what was struck. This is a Russian P-18 radar about 150 kilometers inside Zaporizhia. Ukraine got it with a drone, and I'm sure this thing cost tens of millions of dollars. This is a Ukrainian Ram 2 loitering munition taking out a Nibu M radar in the Belgorod region. Once again, I'm sure this is very valuable, and Ukraine destroyed it with a drone. I guess here's your daily compilation of Firepoint strikes. This is just every day. Every day, Russia is losing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of military equipment. So in this video, first a Tor M2 is taken out, and then a Costa 2E radar. And once the air defense and the radar is gone, more drones come in, and they're destroying, I guess, a electronic warfare radar base in Crimea. It's known as Bars Sarmat. But it's just Firepoint drones slamming into buildings, slamming into warehouses being used by the Russian military. It's going to be a bad winter for the Russians if this war is still going on. This is a supply truck also being hit there. Russia's economy shows first quarterly contraction in 3 years. Oh, really? The Russian economy contracted by 0.3% in the first quarter, making its first quarterly contraction since early 2023. This is according to preliminary data. This isn't because of new Western sanctions. This is because of Ukraine's Firepoint drones and long-range drones decimating Russia's economy. This is Russia's central banker. Nebulina called Russians' savings the only source of financing for the economy. There's nobody choosing to invest in Russia. The Chinese, the Indians, the Saudis, whoever, they're a bit distracted at the moment with what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz being closed. In general, finance and credit around the world is freezing up a little bit, but it's the worst for the Russians. Because of sanctions, because of lack of liquidity, they don't hold reserves of dollars or euros anymore. The central banker of Russia is saying what is keeping Russia alive is Russians saving money themselves and keeping it in bank accounts. Not a great plan. Here's what she said at a recent public forum, and I'll read this for you. The defining feature of the current situation is the labor market. In fact, in modern Russia's history, we have never experienced such a shortage of labor. We have never seen anything like this before, and it is affecting the entire economic situation. She's saying there's a labor shortage in Russia of 2.5 million men. 2.5 million. Where do you think those men went? Russia's taken over 1 million casualties in Ukraine, and another 1 million Russian men have fled the country because they don't want to be conscripted or mobilized. And this is so insane. Russians are moving to Belarus for a better life. More and more Russians are considering moving to Belarus. Internet blockages and messenger slowdowns in Russia have sparked a wave of interest in relocating to Belarus. Minsk is increasingly discussed on social networks. Where all social networks work, European brands are available, and housing prices are several times lower than in Moscow. Belarus closes transit route for Russian military conscripts. So Belarus is saying if you've been conscripted or mobilized, no, you can't move to Belarus to avoid military service, but a lot of other Russians are choosing to move to Belarus. At least Telegram is not blocked there. But I don't see how you can enforce the border. There are no border checkpoints between Russia and Belarus. Belarus is basically just a special self-governing province of Russia, sort of. It's weird, guys. I also just want to mention in the video that Russia is still carrying out terrorist attacks against Ukraine every single night. I don't want the world to forget this. Russian attacks on Ukraine kill 5, injure 23 over the past day, as 2 hospitals in Odessa were targeted. This war needs to end because Russia keeps bombing hospitals and schools and civilians. It's terrible. Let's do a quick update on the situation with Iran. Trump said his blockade would cause Iran's oil industry to explode this week. Why that won't happen? Every day, Trump just continues to make stuff up and make the situation worse. Iran has just informed us that they are in a state of collapse. They want us to open the Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible as they try to figure out their leadership situation. None of that is true. This is Iran's Speaker of their parliament. 3 days in, no wells have exploded. He's talking about oil well pressure. We could extend to 30 and live stream the wells here. That was the kind of junk advice the U.S. administration gets from people like Besant, who also pushed the blockade theory and cranked oil up to $120 a barrel. Next stop, $140 a barrel. The issue isn't the theory, it's the mindset. And Iran's parliament speaker continues to taunt the United States. If you build 2 walls, one from New York City to the West Coast and another one from LA to the East Coast, the total length will be 7,755 kilometers, which is still about 1,000 kilometers short of Iran's total borders. Good luck blockading a country with those borders. P.S. for Pete Hegseth, 1 kilometer equals 0.62 miles. So the Iranians are making fun of Trump, trying to use language he'll understand, such as walls. And, this PS is an indication that Pete Hegseth is an idiot. So he gave the kilometer to mile conversion. But they are correct. Yes, the United States Navy is in the Gulf of Oman. It's currently blockading Iran's coastline. But Iran is a massive country. It can still get food in and out, or oil and gas in and out, through Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, and Iraq. Like, Iran is not going to collapse this month. Eventually it might, but not anytime soon. Iranian economic collapse may come too late for Trump. This is the crisis facing the entire world, and at the moment, Donald Trump is just trying to ignore it because it's bad news. But yesterday, the price of ICE Brent crude hit a 5-year high, going to $122 a barrel. This is higher than in 2022 when Russia first launched their invasion of Ukraine, and there was disruptions with supply chains reorganizing and sanctions going on Russia.
Yeah, gas is $5.
But it's currently at 110, and I think it's going to go higher. I don't think Iran is preparing to surrender. They're stalling for time. All they have to do to defeat Donald Trump is nothing. Keep the strait closed, waste more time, pretend like maybe negotiations are possible when they're not. Iran is playing to win, and Trump is on the clock. I know for my non-American audience this is meaningless, but to the average Trump voter who lives in a rural area or a small town, they drive everywhere. They drive for everything, so they care the most about the price of gasoline, and the national average is now approaching $5 a barrel. The all-time high, once again, was in 2022 with COVID, inflation, and Russia launching the war. But we're easily going to surpass $5 a barrel. I think if the strait stays closed for another month, by the summer travel season, June, July, August, this is going to be at $6, $7, $8 a barrel. The world cannot adjust to this kind of disruption so abruptly. And we have the November elections coming up in 4 or 5 months. Trump's approval rating sinks to a new low as the war with Iran drives cost of living concerns. Trump's approval rating is now the low 30s, high 20s, and it really should go lower. But my opinion of the average MAGA voter is already pretty low, and it's a cult. They're never going to give up on him.
The U.S. Navy just successfully tested a new version of the legendary JDAM, or Joint Direct Attack Munition, that adds a turbojet to the smart bomb. resulting in a new low-cost precision-guided cruise missile with a maximum range approaching 350 miles, carrying a 500-pound warhead. In effect, these new weapons combine the traditional JDAM with the glide kit, or deployable wings, of the JDAM ER, and then add that turbojet engine, taking very common dumb bombs and turning them into full-fledged standoff missiles. But the implications of the new JDAM LR, with that LR short for long range, are way bigger than just stretching the legs of America's cheap bomb stockpiles. Because rather than building just one version of this new weapon, Boeing aims to field at least 4, including that standard JDAM cruise missile, an even longer-ranged decoy, and 2 seafaring variants aimed at providing non-stealth bombers and fighters with the ability to engage enemy warships at standoff ranges, or even to mine relatively shallow waterways from hundreds of miles out. So let's talk about all 4 new variants of Boeing's groundbreaking JDAM LR concept and how they fit into America's larger warfighting strategy. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power.
Good.
Ground news helps you stay on top of what's going on in the world while also helping you see right through common forms of media bias and the sensationalism that's become so commonplace today. Ground news compiles stories from outlets all over the world and sticks them all into one easy-to-read feed that doesn't just help me stay on top of what's going on, but also shows me the very different ways media outlets sometimes cover the same story. You can even choose specific topics that you want to stay on top of, like the military, fighter aircraft, or the ongoing conflict in Iran. Like this one, about U.S. Central Command reportedly looking to deploy the Army's Dark Eagle hypersonic missile to the Middle East. Now, Ground News has already gathered coverage of this story from 21 different news outlets, with 3 of them listed as politically centered. And here on the right side of the screen, you can also see the bias distribution and factuality ratings for coverage of this story, with pretty even distribution across the political spectrum, and 66% of the outlets covering this story rated for high factuality. And Ground News also shows you vital information about each of these outlets along with their headlines, like their political bias, their factuality rating, corporate ownership, or any government affiliations. And I love Ground News' blind spot feature that shows me stories that are getting lots of attention in one political sphere but being ignored in the other. It helps me keep my media consumption balanced. Ground News is a big part of my research and my day-to-day news consumption, and it can be for you too. Just go to ground.news/sandbox with 2 X's, or just follow that link in the description below to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use. Again, that's ground.news/sandbox to get 40% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. According to Naval Air Systems Command, the first successful air launch tests of this new GBU-75 JDAM LR were conducted this month in April over the Navy's Point Mugu Sea Range just off the coast of California. Now, these tests were seemingly of the baseline JDAM LR, which to some extent is little more than a 500-pound class GBU-62 JDAM ER with a turbojet engine affixed to the back, turning one of the world's most potent glide bombs into a full-fledged cruise missile. Now, this baseline weapon is also the basis for 3 other iterations of the JDAM LR, each with a specific and different purpose, including the decoy JDAM LR, the quick strike LR shallow water mine, and the maritime strike iteration made for long-range ship hunting. But these new weapons are about more than just increasing the range of America's JDAMs. They also include onboard power generation meant to allow for new capabilities, like a 2-way data link, or even advanced new seekers to improve the weapon's accuracy, even against moving targets and even in heavily jammed environments. The extended ranges allowed by these new munitions allow the JDAM to graduate from stand-in ordnance or weapons employed at relatively short ranges to full-fledged standoff weapons, meaning the JDAM LR can be launched from well outside the reach of enemy air defenses.
This video is made possible thanks to Olafly, offering unlimited data for your next trip in seconds. More on that in a moment. What a mess in the Middle East. We know, because it's no longer a leak, but a flood of information, that Trump has been trying for weeks to escape the hornet's nest of the Persian Gulf. But there's no way out. The Iranians aren't backing down. They know that this is their golden opportunity and aren't willing to give in easily. And this could cause a massive rift in the White House. Obviously, if things don't get sorted out, someone is going to have to take the fall. Hegseth may be on the front lines, but whatever happens in Iran will directly affect the line of succession. That is, the Republican candidate in 2028. Hold on a minute, did you think it was a done deal that Vance would be the candidate? Well, I think we need to talk about the new darling of the Oval Office, Marco Antonio Rubio.
People like you. You know, Marco got 100% of the votes when he was in confirmation. I think our next one was about 54%. And some of the Democrats are now saying, I can't believe we approved that guy. And he said it's an honor that they feel that way, right, Marco? You have done a great job, great Secretary of State. I think he'll go down as the best ever.
The Pentagon, the Treasury, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA, and of course, the State Department. They've all been very busy lately trying to fulfill the president's wishes. But if anyone has stood out above all the others in recent months, if anyone seems closest to the president, it is precisely the subject of today's video. Marco Rubio has gained so much ground that some already believe he could challenge J.D. Vance for the Republican nomination in 2028, which in itself represents a huge shift. A quantum leap for a guy whose appointment raised many doubts.
Trump's Rubio pick divides Republicans. Rubio received praise from various Republicans and Democrats. Those in the so-called MAGA wing of the GOP have expressed a mix of surprise and disappointment about the pick.
Rubio was considered practically the least MAGA-aligned figure in the cabinet. In fact, the announcement of his appointment was delayed longer than expected, and no one was sure to what extent Trump, known for his vindictive nature, would forgive him for his past hostility during the 2016 primaries, when Marco Rubio went so far as to say things like this about the current president.
He began to explain to the American people that Donald Trump is a con artist.
Marco Rubio, Donald Trump is the most vulgar person to run for the US president ever.
To make matters worse, his profile didn't seem to quite fit either.
In deep MAGA circles, Rubio is seen as representative of the old Republican Party, a politician with a globalist and interventionist vision, a hawk on foreign policy who strays far from the characteristic isolationism of this movement. Rubio supports Ukraine, is pro-NATO, is hostile toward Russia, and wants the United States to control the Americas as it sees fit. And not only that, his own Latino roots and his closeness to Hispanic communities also don't quite align with the more nationalist and identity-driven vision held by a significant portion of this movement.
In fact, for months, the bet in Washington was on how long he would last in Trump's cabinet. And yet, here we are. Rubio has gone from being the most questioned member to practically becoming one of its biggest rock stars. So what happened? Well, Rubio's position has changed radically. When he was appointed, everyone assumed his role would be secondary because, with Trump, diplomacy is largely left to the White House. That Rubio's work would be limited to the Americas and little else. But that hasn't been the case. This former Florida senator has managed to climb to the front lines of this administration, to the point of becoming the president's true favorite.
And Marco, you really did yourself proud 2 days ago in Munich. In fact, so proud that I almost terminated his employee, because they were saying, why can't Trump do this? I do, but I say it differently. But Marco, don't do any better than you did, please. Because if you do, you're out of here.
And no wonder, the Venezuela coup, the Cuba operation, the ability to apply pressure in Europe when things were spiraling out of control. In recent months, Marco Rubio has racked up a ton of political points.
January 3rd marked a turning point. The capture of Nicolas Maduro and the deal with Delcy Rodriguez has been the most successful operation to date of this second Trump administration. And the thing is, Marco Rubio played the leading role in that operation. It was his goal and his great victory.
Sale of the wealth of Venezuela in such a way that benefits the people, both of the United States, but also the people of Venezuela. And as a reminder to everyone, the president announced this just 2 days ago. Every penny, everything they buy with the money that they're making from the oil now, Mr. President, will be bought from America. And that includes everything from equipment for the oil industry, to food, to medicine, and everything in between.
And that's not the end of it. It has also been leaked that he did not fully agree with the massive campaign against Iran, the most unpopular and potentially most disastrous US military offensive in recent years. While Pete Hegseth encouraged the president to take the plunge and dive headfirst into this hornet's nest, Rubio expressed far more doubts in the Situation Room. He advocated intervening, pressuring Iran, and striking specific targets as a serious deterrent, but not getting over their heads. And right now, it's highly likely that Trump regrets not having listened more to his Secretary of State, which, in the long run, will surely give him even more influence.
I think Marco will go down in history as the best Secretary of State. That's my opinion. Now, I admit I'm a little biased because I like him.
And you know what? This is starting to really worry the staunchest purists of the MAGA movement, because now they fear that Rubio could become a direct threat to their ability to control the party and the American right. Think of it this way, the polls aren't looking good. MAGA is undergoing major internal upheaval, and in that scenario, Rubio might seem like a more solid alternative to many donors and party heavyweights, which could end up sparking a massive political battle in the coming years. Though, don't go thinking that Rubio is a liberal, he's not at all. On domestic policy, he does support tough line policies, which means he isn't that far removed from MAGA on key issues like immigration. But on foreign policy, things change.
Marco Rubio's policies might shut the door to people like his grandfather. Mr. Rubio is not alone among the Republican presidential candidates in demanding a more vigilant refugee vetting process. So has Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, whose own father left Cuba.
In any case, here on the team, we've been asking each other several questions. What does Rubio's meteoric...
This griffin is looking good. I'm gonna lower the camera down a bit. There we go.
rise mean for the Republican Party? Is it a counterweight to the growing influence of MAGA? Could it signal the return of the old party and the overcoming of Trumpism? Will we perhaps see an open war over the succession? Pay close attention to everything we're about to tell you.
We care deeply about your future and ours. And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. I believe that Europe must survive, because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours.
Before we get started, quick question. Have you ever landed in another country and suddenly realized your data isn't working? Or even worse, that you're about to get hit with crazy roaming charges? Yeah, not a great feeling. That's exactly why I switched to using Olafly's eSIM, and honestly, it's made travelling way more seamless. If you're not familiar with it, an eSIM is basically a digital SIM card. No physical card, no waiting around for delivery, no swapping anything in your phone. You just install it, and you're good to go. With Olafly, you get coverage in more than 200 destinations, unlimited data, and the setup takes less than a minute. They'll even send everything straight to your email or WhatsApp. What really makes it stand out is how simple and transparent it is. A lot of providers limit your data or hit you with unexpected fees, but with Olafly, you get a clear, tailored plan with no surprises. And if your trip ends up being longer than planned, you can easily top up on the spot. No interruptions, no hassle. One of my favorite things, you can keep your regular SIM and your WhatsApp number, so staying connected with friends, family, or work is effortless. And if anything comes up, their 24/7 customer support connects you with real people, not bots, which makes a big difference. They've already sold over 15 million eSIMs worldwide, and with a 4.6-star rating on Trustpilot from more than 80,000 reviews, it's easy to see why so many travelers rely on them. Whether you're going to Japan, Italy, Mexico, the US, or pretty much anywhere, Olafly has you covered. They also offer Olafly Plans, a monthly subscription designed for longer trips, with coverage in over 160 destinations. And with the Always On feature, you'll still get 1 GB per month, even after your plan expires, or if you cancel it. So if you want to travel without worrying about roaming fees or losing connection, Olafly is definitely worth checking out. You'll find the link in the description, where you can get 5% off any eSIM and 10% off Olafly plans using our code, so you can stay connected wherever you go. And now, back to our topic. Being Secretary of State of the United States of America is no small matter. It's one of the most powerful and influential positions in the world. After all, the State Department directs the foreign policy of the West's greatest military and economic power. Or at least that's what it's supposed to do. Because as you know, with Trump, everything goes through the White House. And there, Rubio, who has been in politics for 26 years, 15 of them at the highest level, first as a senator and now in the administration, has managed to carve out a niche for himself like no one else. He has positioned himself to such an extent that he is not only the Secretary of State, but also the President's National Security Advisor, which guarantees him a crucial role within the White House team, with all that entails.
If we look at what the administration is actually doing, not just what it says, the bellicose foreign policy one might have expected from President Rubio is clearly present in the policies of Trump's second term.
And the fact is, Rubio's shift has been tremendous. He has managed to carve out a very strong niche for himself in this administration.
The MAGA brain transplant on Rubio is complete. The Marco Rubio who used to talk about the importance of democracy and human rights and freedom of speech as part of U.S. foreign policy has disappeared.
And it's not just a political shift. He also has powerful allies. For example, he's known to have had a close relationship for many years with...
And eat a burger, and then I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I'm back. Back and back. Now we're moving on. We're done with the mythical monsters. So now I'm moving on. I think we're doing, at least the first few are from a Polar Patch. Polar Patch pack. Hey, honey. You playing Hogwarts? There's the bare face outline. The bare outline.
Susie Wiles, the powerful chief of staff, who is also from Florida. In fact, it appears that Wiles played a major role in his selection as National Security Advisor. In any case, Rubio himself has ruled out any idea of running for the Republican nomination in 2028. He has said that he would only consider it if Vance drops out.
If J.D. Vance runs for president, he will be our candidate, and I will be one of the first people to support him.
Meanwhile, the reality is, the vice president isn't having the best of times. He's neither popular, nor are things going particularly well for him. His Silicon Valley support group has lost influence in the White House, and the president's agenda has led them to get deeply involved in Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. This clashes head-on with the isolationist agenda championed by J.D. Vance. And not only that, to make matters worse, J.D. Vance is not popular at all. In fact, he isn't even popular within much of the Republican ranks.
J.D. Vance's 2028 presidential election chances plunge in new poll.
YouGov polls show a dramatic decline in the vice president's image, a decline even steeper than that of Trump himself. But between January and April of 2026 alone, support for a J.D. Vance candidacy in 2028 among voters who identify as Republicans and among independents who typically lean toward the Republican Party has dropped by more than 5 points. Right now, only 36% support this idea, a percentage that is starting to look very low when you consider consider that this candidacy was considered a sure thing not long ago. And it's not just about the polls. If we look at the betting markets, it's a very similar story. The odds of Vance being the candidate in 2028 have plummeted, while Marco Rubio is rapidly closing the gap. Just look, back in November, the odds that Vance would be the nominee stood at 60%, compared to just 7% for Marco Rubio. Today, the numbers are 39 to 21. In other words, Rubio has closed the 35-point gap with the vice president in less than 6 months, because, as I've already mentioned, there are more and more doubts. And on top of that, lately, nothing seems to be going right for him. As we've already said, the gap between him and the president's agenda seems to be growing wider. But on top of that, whenever he's been given a role lately, whether in Israel, Hungary, or in the negotiations with Iran, things haven't exactly gone well for him. And that has consequences.
Rubio gains early momentum in the hypothetical 2028 Republican primary race.
In fact, the Wall Street Journal reported on a meeting at Mar-a-Lago between Trump and key Republican donors right after the war with Iran began. I quote the Wall Street Journal verbatim. As attendees dined on jumbo crab and ribeye steaks, Trump asked the crowd, "What do you think of J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio?" The guests applauded louder for Rubio, according to people in the room. And the fact is, it's well known that the president has been asking a lot of questions in recent months precisely about this very issue. Questions that, by their very existence, pose a threat to the vice president. Because think about it, why ask something that's supposedly already decided? Well, because it clearly isn't. Also, keep an eye on this. Major pro-Israel donors in the Republican Party are wary of Vance's ties to people like Tucker Carlson and his perhaps weaker commitment to the Jewish state. And that's why they're leaking that they'd prefer to support Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And okay, some of you might be thinking, but Josh, he's the vice president. He has to be the candidate. Why? History tells us that's not how it works. Prior to 1960, vice presidents didn't amount to much unless they reached the Oval Office due to their president's death. Their role was negligible. Starting in 1960, it's true that things changed. We began to see many vice presidents win their party's nominations, but the reality is that only 3 have managed to reach the Oval Office. Nixon, Eisenhower's vice president, who lost to Kennedy and only won many years later. George H.W. Bush, who effectively inherited power from Ronald Reagan. And Biden, who ran for office 4 years after leaving the vice presidency. So only one, George Bush, managed to win the Oval Office immediately after leaving the vice presidency. That means that being vice president doesn't automatically make you a candidate, much less a winning candidate. Keep that clearly in mind. Of course, the truth is that this isn't the whole story either.
Marco is my closest friend in the administration. I think it's so interesting that the media wants to create this conflict where there just isn't any conflict.
For now, Vance and Rubio seem to have a good relationship. And besides, Vance isn't just vice president. He also chairs the Republican Party's powerful finance committee, and he's raising a lot of money and building a strong list of supporters with full wallets. In just the last few weeks, he's been on a tour of breakfasts, lunches, and dinners that are estimated to have raised over $60 million for the Republicans. Then, regarding money from pro-Israel donors, what is the vice president doing? Well, he's trying to win over the strongest pro-Israel supporter and one of the largest donor bases within the Republican Party, Miriam Adelson, the widow of casino magnate Sheldon Adelson. Not only that, clearly he maintains his very close relationship with Peter Thiel and many Silicon Valley billionaires. And we all know that in US elections, money matters. And it matters a lot. That's why many believe that the plan for a joint candidacy remains the most likely scenario.
They are good people. Well, we have great people. I don't have to get into that, but we have one of them standing right here. We have J.D., obviously. The vice president is great. I think Marco is great. I think, I'm not sure if anybody would run against us. I think if they ever formed a group, it would be unstoppable.
In any case, it's highly likely that what ends up happening in Cuba will be decisive. Cuba could become Trump's great legacy. So, if that operation were to succeed, Rubio could be crowned. Having said that, one important point. Trump can't fire Vance, but he could fire the current Secretary of State. And let's face it, right now, that obviously doesn't seem likely. But the truth is that this president is a shredder of top officials, particularly in the state and national security departments. Today, you might be on the best of terms with him, and tomorrow, he might get tired of you and show you the door. And if you don't believe me, just ask Rex Tillerson, John Bolton, McMaster, Mike Waltz, Pompeo, General Kellogg, well, the list goes on. What's more, the Trump administration has been in power for just over a year, and my goodness, how bad the approval ratings are. If they don't change course, perhaps the Republican candidate won't end up being either one of these two men, which wouldn't be at all that surprising. In fact, generally speaking, presidential candidates in the United States tend to be quite unexpected. Perhaps a governor, a senator, or an outsider. In fact, an early escalating war could lead to precisely that scenario. The protagonists of this story know this, and that's why they'll be very careful not to make a move in public. But yes, Rubio's rise has been meteoric. But now that we've gotten this far, it's your turn. What role do you think Marco Rubio will play in the coming years? Can the Secretary of State
I don't know. Like he said, I think we need to wait to see what happens in Cuba.
So it's day 63 of the Iran war. Or is it? White House officials claim that the United States is no longer at war with Iran, yet President Trump seems to be reviewing options for increasing military action. What is actually going on? Well, combat operations started on the 28th of February and there was a ceasefire called on the 7th of April. But a ceasefire doesn't mean the end of operations. So why was it that a White House official claimed that hostilities had now been terminated? The answer, of course, lies with the fact that President Trump never sought congressional approval for this conflict, and therefore, under the 1973 War Powers Act, he has 60 days to either withdraw forces or to seek congressional approval. Given the deep unpopularity of the war in America, it's very unlikely that would be achieved. Meanwhile, there are reports suggesting that President Trump is looking at a resumption of high-level military action against Iran. If they does prosecute that, what will be the main targets that we're looking to prosecute? What is very clear is that President Trump has been consistent that the main effort of this war is to stop Iran securing a nuclear weapon. There's two ways of doing that, either through negotiation or through the use of military action to destroy its capability. It feels like America's losing confidence in the negotiation route and therefore might potentially increase its targeting of the Iranian nuclear potential targets. Here's a selection of them here. You'll remember Fordo from earlier last year when Operation Midnight Hammer involved B-2 bombers delivering 20,000-pound bunker buster bombs. We can see one on test here that go deep underground before exploding, that are a unique capability to the B-2. Of course, were they effective? One of the challenges when you look at satellite imagery of the region, and we see some of it here, is that at surface level you can see holes where those bombs went through. But as a former weapons instructor on the fighter community, I can tell you it's one thing to know that you've hit a target, it's quite another to do battle damage assessment of whether you've actually destroyed it. The target itself is deep underground, very difficult to tell. So almost certainly what's been happening since the ceasefire's been in place is America and Israeli intelligence has been using all means at its disposal to try to work out how many of these facilities were destroyed, how many were simply just damaged in some way, and how many are still fully operational. That would enable the creation of a new master target list, potentially for Operation Midnight Hammer 2. Meanwhile, across in the Lebanon, although the ceasefire is meant to be in place, the reality on the ground is it feels like full-scale warfighting, as the Israeli Defense Forces seek to defeat Hezbollah, the proxy of Iran. Exactly what the Israeli Defense Forces' objective are is not entirely clear. They clearly want to make a buffer zone of some form to protect northern Israel from attack. But at the moment, as is clear from some of these strikes away from the buffer zone, it's quite likely that they'll want to go all the way to the Litani River. They've done that before, but such an operation will be dangerous and it will take time, potentially weeks or even months. It is worth remembering as well that at the start of the ceasefire, President Trump did not want Netanyahu's actions here to compromise the success of the peace talks with Iran. But those peace talks seem to have stalled, they're not going anywhere, and it's quite possible now that it suits President Trump's agenda to give Prime Minister Netanyahu a bit more rope, because the more pressure that's brought to bear on Hezbollah, the more pressure potentially is getting brought to bear on Iran to bring the war to an end. What is absolutely clear, though, is that the level of destruction being wreaked by the Israeli Defense Forces, this is not in response to simple ceasefire violations. This is a resumption of full-scale war and a clear intent to clear this whole area of Hezbollah forces. The irony, of course, here is that despite the US and Israeli military dominance, they've not actually been able to solve the core underlying problems. Iran retains the ambition of developing a nuclear program, and although the war has undoubtedly degraded its ability, it will rebuild, and in the absence of robust negotiations, the danger is history will repeat itself. So it's day 63 of the Iran war. Or is it? White House.
Just before we get started on today's video, a quick note to let you know that this was recorded before the coordinated assault that took place across Mali last weekend, in which two separate insurgent groups killed senior members of the junta and took over key towns. Obviously, that's a massive escalation by groups that are the focus of today's video and indicates that the threat may be even greater than we thought when we originally made the video you're about to see. But our core analysis in this video remains unchanged, and it is still a great primer for anyone wondering what the f*** is going on in the Sahel right now. Enjoy. The director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies described them as the most formidable extremist group in sub-Saharan Africa, and with good reason. In Mali alone, where the group was formed in 2017, they're responsible for a 300% spike in violent attacks and a humanitarian crisis that has left almost 500,000 people displaced, 1.8 million facing food insecurity, and 5.1 million in need of humanitarian assistance. And that's just one country. Mali. In Burkina Faso, they have committed multiple atrocities, including in Barcelona, where they killed over 200 civilians in the worst massacre in the nation's history, while in Nigeria, they attacked Kwara State earlier this year, killing a soldier and seizing ammunition and money. In northern Benin, near the border with Niger, they also recently attacked a base, killing 15 soldiers. This is Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, or JNIM, an al-Qaeda-linked Salafi jihadist group that was formed after four Mali-based extremist groups merged with the Sahara Emirate subgroup of al-Qaeda in the lands of the Islamic Maghreb, or AKIM. They swore their allegiance to al-Qaeda leadership. Since their formation, the group has been on a rapid ascendancy, with the International Crisis Group publishing a report in February this year saying that they were the most dominant jihadist group in the Sahel, which is really saying something given the multiple insurgent groups in that region. That dominance has led some to compare it with the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, better known as ISIS, the jihadist group which, at the height of its powers, controlled a caliphate that covered an area of more than 100,000 square kilometers, stretching from Aleppo in Syria to Diyala in Iraq. Given their rapid territorial expansion and growing influence across the Sahel, some observers have begun asking an uncomfortable question. Could JNIM declare its own caliphate? Could we be witnessing the next jihadist proto-state taking shape in West Africa? Just before we continue, a quick question. Do you actually think that incognito mode helps keep you private? Well, it doesn't really. Look, when you're online, your internet provider, your school or work network, even your Wi-Fi router can still see what you're doing. Incognito just hides things locally in your computer, not from everybody else, which is kind of what matters. And that's where CyberGhost VPN comes in. It encrypts your internet traffic and hides your IP address, routing your connection through secure servers in over 100 locations, so your activity stays private. CyberGhost is also great beyond privacy. You can unlock content from over 40 streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney Plus just by changing your virtual location. In some cases, you even get access to bigger libraries depending on the country. I know that for a fact that I do. It works across all major devices: Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, and with one subscription you can protect up to 7 devices at the same time. With over 38 million users worldwide and thousands of excellent Trustpilot reviews, it's one of the most trusted VPNs out there. So if you want to try it, check out the link in the description below or in the pinned comment. You can get it for about $2 a month, 84% off plus 4 months for free, and there's a 45-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk. And now back to today's video. Building a caliphate. Now, before we answer that question, we need to discuss what it takes to establish a caliphate, because while it may be a popular idea among jihadists, only one group has actually managed to do it in the modern era. Forming a caliphate, which experts define as an Islamic state of the Muslim faithful, requires a lot more than just military success. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who served as the second general emir of al-Qaeda, set out 4 conditions that had to be met before a caliphate could be declared in the Middle East. First, expelling foreign forces from controlled territory. Second, establishing support and developing an Islamic authority. Third, extending the jihad to neighboring secular countries. And finally, fighting Israel. ISIS succeeded where other groups had failed because they did the first 2 steps remarkably well. By 2014, when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi delivered his speech from Mosul's al-Nuri Mosque announcing the caliphate's formation, ISIS controlled enough territory to make the claim credible, even if most Muslim scholars rejected it. Then they built the structures. The group enforced Sharia law, managed an annual budget of about $2 billion, and commanded more than 30,000 fighters at its peak. ISIS also required that groups seeking to join nominate a governor, establish a Shura council for religious leadership, and formulate a military strategy to consolidate territory in the region that they would actually be able to control. Apart from these structures, ISIS also benefited from timing. The Syrian civil war and Iraqi sectarian tensions created power vacuums that the group exploited ruthlessly. So, what does Jenim have going for it in the quest to form a caliphate? Well, first of all, money, and a lot of it. The group recently received $15 million from the United Arab Emirates to release several hostages, one of whom was a member of the Emirati royal family. According to BBC Monitoring, the exchange also saw the group receive an additional $20 million worth of arms and ammunition. This isn't the first time the group has received such a massive windfall. In 2020, Jenim secured around $40 million in ransom for 1 French and 2 Italian hostages. The group supplements the income with kidnappings and various taxes imposed on anything passing through their territory, as well as cattle rustling. Research by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, or GITOC, showed that in just 1 year, in one district of Mali, Jenim made $770,000 from cattle rustling. Based on this figure, Jenim could be earning millions of dollars from cattle theft alone. And that money's important because in a region where the average monthly salary ranges from $110 in Mali to $150 in Burkina Faso, Jenim can offer fighters salaries that dwarf what they can make from legitimate employment. The money also allows them to arm their fighters. While precise figures on small arms costs in the Sahel are difficult to pin down, the region's arms markets operate at a fraction of Western prices, particularly when weapons flow from looted government stockpiles or cross porous borders from Libya and other conflict zones. Second, Jenim has benefited massively from the political chaos triggered by numerous coups across the region. When military juntas seized power in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they expelled Western forces, replacing them with Russian mercenaries whose efforts at combating the jihadists have been, in a word, unsuccessful. Terror attacks have increased significantly since Moscow became the region's main security guarantor. According to Atrocities Watch, a non-partisan civil society organization, there was a 70% increase in violent events by jihadist groups in Mali since the military takeover in May 2021, and civilian fatalities in the first quarter of 2022 were higher than in any previous calendar year. And according to an investigation by the Associated Press, the Russians are as brutal, if not more brutal, than the jihadis. Dozens of people who fled Mali accused the Afrika Korps, which replaced the Wagner Group, of carrying out heinous abuses. A Malian village chief who fled to Mauritania told the AP, and we'll quote him here, "It's a scorched earth policy. The soldiers speak to no one. Anyone they see, they shoot. No questions, no warning. People don't know why they are being killed." According to the African Center for Strategic Studies, Malian security forces and their Russian partners were linked to 77% of all civilian fatalities, which has driven Jenim recruitment while eroding public trust in the Malian military. The Malian government seems to have realized that the Russian partnership is not working. Bamako is currently negotiating a deal with Washington that would allow American aircraft and drones to resume flying over Malian airspace to gather intelligence on jihadist groups. But whether that happens in time to prevent further territorial losses is anyone's guess. And that leads us to point number 3. Territory. Jenim has been methodically expanding its reach beyond its traditional strongholds in the north and center. Dr. Daniel Ezienga, a research fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, told Responsible Statecraft in October 2025 that Jenim controlled more territory than they had at any other point in their 13-year insurgency. The group's territorial ambitions extend to the capital itself. Jenim initiated a siege on Bamako that brought the city to its knees, controlling the roads leading into the city and blockading fuel tankers from neighboring countries. The group destroyed hundreds of fuel tankers, creating acute shortages that caused fuel prices to spike by more than 400%, forcing schools and businesses to close while power cuts became the norm. In late January, the Africa Report reported that the siege on Bamako had eased, but the residents were unsure how long peace was going to last. In Burkina Faso, the situation looks even grimmer. According to Al Jazeera, the nation has rapidly become a Jenim hotspot, with the group operating or holding territory in 11 of 13 Burkina Faso regions outside of the capital. Between January and April 2025, there were 512 reported casualties as a result of Jenim attacks. And given that these are just the reported numbers from a 4-month period. Last year, the actual number of fatalities are undoubtedly higher. Like in Mali, JNIM has laid siege to cities in Burkina Faso, most notably Sole and Djibo. In May 2025, JNIM launched a devastating attack on Djibo, with sources telling Crisis Group that jihadists killed more than 100 civilians, soldiers, and paramilitary members, and kidnapped dozens more. The situation in the capital has got so severe that Will Brown, a senior policy fellow for Africa at the European Council on Foreign Relations, warned in an interview with the African Defense Forum magazine that we could soon see a Mogadishu-style scenario where the government is increasingly confined to an embattled capital. And while these two countries are the most affected by the insurgency, they aren't the only ones. In an exclusive interview with the Warfront's team, Henny Nassabir, a senior analyst for ACLED focusing on the Sahel, said that the group is currently active in 6 countries. We chose to focus on Mali and Burkina Faso because of the scale of the threat facing the countries. And because if JNIM were to form a caliphate, it would probably start in these 2 places. And that leads us back to our main question. Could JNIM really form a caliphate? And before we attempt to answer that simultaneously depressing and terrifying question, a quick bit of info on our latest project. Frontstock.co is our subscriber site for people who want to dig beneath the headlines, get away from all of the noise and shouting, and figure out what the real stories are. Every week we publish 2 exclusive videos and at least 2 exclusive articles explaining both the famous and lesser-known conflicts shaping our world. Just earlier this year, for example, we did a deep dive into the evolution of the Islamic State in Mozambique, a terrifying counterpart to all the horrors now happening in the Sahel. A subscription is just $5 a month and it gets you access to everything from videos to our brand new exclusive weekly podcast on the Middle East. That's Fronts.co, it's $5 a month, and now let's get back to the question of a potential JNIM caliphate. Could versus should. Now, like most things in geopolitics, the answer isn't an easy yes or no. While everything that we've presented so far would indicate that JNIM could, at least in theory, form a caliphate, several regional experts don't think that that's their goal at the moment. Brant Phillip, a Sahel-focused terrorism tracker, told the Warfront's team in another exclusive interview that JNIM isn't trying to form a caliphate because they don't believe in the idea. Nusaybir from ACLED disagreed, saying that although the formation of a caliphate was one of the goals of JNIM and Al-Qaeda more broadly, the Sahel-based group had a more modest immediate objective: to create a jihadist-led proto-state through the gradual Islamization of society and co-optation of local political structures. In some places, they already do this, providing rudimentary governance, justice, dispute resolution, and security. Beyond the question of goals, which could change given the right conditions, there are several structural issues that would make it extremely difficult for JNIM to form a caliphate in West Africa. First, as Nusaybir noted, the territory the group controls is fragmented. ISIS, at its peak, is controlled by a contiguous stretch of land from the outskirts of Aleppo in Syria to towns in eastern Iraq near the Iranian border. That unbroken territorial belt allowed ISIS to move fighters, resources, and supplies freely across the caliphate, which was a major reason why they held it for so long. JNIM's holdings, on the other hand, look nothing like that. While the group does control vast tracts of territory, it is still reliant on what the Critical Threats Project dubs support zones to move its fighters. These are areas where a group is not subject to significant enemy action and can conduct effective logistics and administration supportive forces. Their use indicates that the areas that JNIM effectively controls remain fragmented. While this is good news for the Malian government, ACLED notes that there is a risk of Mali becoming a patchwork of territories all under varied control, which would be a disaster. Second is manpower. In 2014, the CIA estimated that the Islamic State had between 20,000 and 31,500 fighters between its Iraq and Syria holdings. Fouad Hussein, the chief of staff to Kurdish President Massoud Barzani, told The Independent that the CIA's estimates were far too low and that ISIS had at least 200,000 fighters. While that's an extremely wide range of figures, even if we were to take the extreme lower end of 20,000, that's twice as many fighters as JNIM has, which Nusaybir estimated to be 10,000. To put that in perspective, when Russia deployed 50,000 troops near Sumy in northeastern Ukraine last year, the move was widely understood as a fixing action. 10,000 fighters is not a serious number in military terms, unless you're fighting Liechtenstein. And that small of a force means that JNIM can't effectively hold vast swaths of
my plan, I'm going to take this wood. Get that out of the way. All over my hand. Right now, what I'm doing is polyurethane. These three of the sets of the sedan critters. I'll probably do 2 to 3 coats, depending on how the shine sets. And I've rather a good amount on. I'm going to fill in the wood, make these last for a while. The only problem with polyurethane, each time I do so, gotta throw away the brush. Ah. This camera ain't been capturing what I've been doing. There we go. One more gratitude pack. These should. The polyurethane changes everything. It's so much better. Now we're going to do some domestic buddies. Oh! Not what I wanted to happen there. another set of domestic buddies for its treatment. It just looks so much better with a polyurethane coat.
I woke with the grain in my palm and the chisel at rest. A plank on the bench and a knot in its chest. The kettle sang thin while the daylight spread, and I laid out my colors like a deck of cards read.
So now,
ash in the board, oak in the flame, pine for the frame, and a nick in my name. Then the first strike rang, then the second one too, like a whole old room knew what my hands came to do. One for the sawdust, two for the stain, three for the brush and the breath through the grain, four for the resin, clear as rain. Count it out, say it again. One for the sawdust, two for the stain, three for the brush and the breath through the grain, four for the resin, clear as rain. Say it loud, say it proud, say it again. I shook the tin lid, I cracked the seal, gold in the jar with a slow blue peel. I poured that amber with a daylight bent, and it moved like a river through the cracks I mended. My thumb wore red and my sleeve wore green, my nails caught paint from the year between, and every small tap from the man in his face kept time like a heel on a timbered floor pane. One for the sawdust, two for the stain, three for the brush and the breath through the grain, four for the resin, clear as rain. Count it out, say it again. One for the sawdust, two for the stain, three for the brush and the breath through the grain, four for the resin, clear as rain. Say it loud, say it proud, say it again. I cut my line from a crooked old board, from a song in the wedge and the bite of the cord. The room went warm with a spoke shape bit, and the offcuts danced in the corner of it. There was red on the rag and white on the rim, a little green smear on the edge of the trim, and every tool on the table had a story to tell, like a prayer in the rafters, like a bell in the well. One for the sawdust, two for the stain, three for the brush and the breath through the grain, four for the resin, clear as rain. Count it out, say it again. One for the sawdust, two for the stain, three for the brush and the breath through the grain, four for the resin, clear as rain. Say it loud, say it proud, say it again. When the varnish dries, let the whole thing shine. Let the scars hold gold in the evening light. I was made from the shavings and the settled dust, and the work in my hands is the work of us. One for the sawdust, two for the stain, three for the brush and the breath through the grain, four for the resin, clear as rain. Count it out, say it again. One for the sawdust, two for the stain, three for the brush and the breath through the grain, four for the resin, clear as rain. Say it loud, say it proud, say it again. Tap it down, let it hold, let it stay. Brush by brush, we paint the day.
tell your thing. What? Ah. Now we'll get back to doing the React and wood burning portion of the evening.
Territory for too long. Apart from the smaller number, there's the fact that, as Philip pointed out, fighters are more loyal to their regional or factional leaders than Islamic State fighters were to the Caliphate. Quoting Philip, "At its core, Jenim is technically a coalition of groups. Regional leaders have much more local authority, such as the Diko brothers in Burkina Faso or Amodo Kofa in central Mali. Jenim is more of a network, whereas peak Islamic State was more of a monolithic proto-caliphate. If Jenim were to create a caliphate, while fighters are still loyal to their local commanders, there's a risk that infighting for control could make the entire caliphate collapse before any kind of external pressures even came to bear. Still, if Jenim were to overcome all these challenges, they could potentially form a caliphate. The question is whether they should. Declaring a caliphate would immediately draw attention that Jenim might prefer to avoid. West African governments understand that tolerating a jihadist state means watching their own security crumble next, and they would do anything to prevent that from happening. The regional bloc, ECOWAS, recently announced plans to mobilize a force initially made up of 2,000 troops by the end of 2026 to tackle armed groups expanding across the region. Jenim declaring a caliphate would see the date of deployment moved up and the number of soldiers deployed increased by several orders of magnitude. The AU could intervene as well, sending peacekeepers to the region, because a caliphate would present a risk to the entire continent. Washington would almost certainly get involved as well, because the national security strategy specifically highlights Islamist terrorism as a risk that the US should be aware of. We've already seen what this intervention could look like. In December 2025, President Trump ordered strikes against Islamic State militants in northwest Nigeria, firing Tomahawk missiles from a Navy destroyer in the Gulf of Guinea. The strikes targeted ISIS camps in Sokoto State and killed what AFRICOM described as multiple terrorists. The US also sent 100 military personnel to Abuja to help train Nigerian soldiers in the fight against armed groups. We also have to talk about France, because although French troops were expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, French interests remain, especially in countries like Benin, where the jihadist group seems keen on expanding into, which means that France will almost certainly get involved. While Paris might be hesitant to send troops, given the extreme anti-French sentiment in the region, France could still provide training, funding, intelligence, and equipment to regional forces. This would protect French interests while avoiding the accusations of neo-colonialism that usually occur.
The Air Force just cannot quit the A-10 Warthog no matter how hard it tries what seems like every single year. On April 20th, the Secretary of the Air Force said that the A-10 will be extended to 2030. That is a pretty significant development for the Air Force when you consider that just last June they tried to retire all 162 of them by the end of fiscal year 2026. Besides the near constant attempts to send the Warthog to the boneyard, signs that the aircraft are headed off into the sunset are plentiful. The final class, the last class ever of A-10 Warthog pilots has just graduated, depot level maintenance is winding down, and squadrons that once flew the Warthog have since moved on from them. At the same time, the Air Force has kept finding new jobs for the airplane, and they've kept upgrading it, and they took it back to combat in Iran. So if you are confused about whether the A-10 is leaving, fair enough. Today, we hope to bring some clarity to this relationship by breaking down what just happened, why the A-10 keeps facing the axe, how it keeps escaping it, and what this says about our current capabilities. First off, why does the Air Force keep trying to get rid of the A-10, and why does the A-10 keep hanging around? A lot of people answer that question with nostalgia. They hear the gun, they think of Iraq and Afghanistan, and then they decide that the whole debate starts and ends with Bert. I mean, they kind of have a point. But ultimately, the A-10 survives because the Air Force has not fully solved the problems that its absence would create, namely getting a very big gun very close to stuff to destroy it more better. The service wants to build for a high-end war against a country like China with stealth, standoff, and speed. But the United States keeps ending up in the messier, lower-end, and more politically constrained fights where an ugly old attack jet can still do very real work. This on-again, off-again relationship is pretty old. The Air Force has been trying to move on from the A-10 for decades. Production ended in the mid-1980s, but even back then, Air Force leaders were already uneasy about how survivable the jet would be against a true peer threat. That basic objection has not changed much since. The A-10 is slow, it is not stealthy, it is specialized, and in a modern air defense environment, or even one with man-pads like we are seeing in Iran, it is a lot easier to kill than the people who love the airplane usually want to admit. So on that point, the Air Force is not entirely wrong, but as we discussed in our video on why the Army will never ever get the A-10, fixed wing close air support is legally the Air Force's job, so they don't really have much choice. If you are planning for a war over Taiwan or trying to fight inside a dense integrated air defense network, the A-10 is not the airplane you build your future around. It is not multi-role in the way a service obsessed with flexibility wants and needs. And if budgets are tight, it is not hard to see why Air Force leaders would rather spend money and manpower on F-35s, F-15EXs, tankers, bombers, and whatever comes next, compared to a nearly 50-year-old aircraft whose maintenance needs keep going up each year, much like your own. Now we gotta mention here that budgets are not tight and arguably have not been for quite some time, but with a request of $1.5 trillion, crying poor just isn't gonna work anymore. That is why the fiscal year 2026 budget was supposed to be the end of the line. The Air Force wanted to retire all 162 remaining A-10s in one shot instead of slowly shrinking the fleet like it has been doing the past few years. And it seemed like they were actually going to pull it off this time. Then, as they usually do, Congress stepped in and canceled those plans. In the signed National Defense Authorization Act, the Air Force was required to keep at least 103 A-10s, with 93 designated as primary mission aircraft through September 30th, 2026, which would be the end of fiscal year 2026. Then, finally, they could divest all of them before fiscal year 2029 if they had a transition plan. That transition plan is the big holdup. Every time the Air Force tries to retire the Warthog, Congress asks what is going to replace it right now, not what could eventually replace it, or what is going to fill the role as best as it can, and this time it is no different. And that is a real concern. Close air support is important. As much as we all love things like precision munitions and drones, sometimes you just need something that can fire a ton of really big bullets, and nobody can argue that the A-10 doesn't do that. So while it seems like the Air Force's most senior leaders are out on the A-10, the Warthog has defenders in the Guard, in communities built around the A-10, and among lawmakers who do not love the idea of retiring a proven aircraft before something else is clearly ready to take over. Back in 2016, the Government Accountability Office said the Air Force had not fully identified the capability and capacity gaps that could result from A-10 divestment. That criticism still hangs over this argument, because even if you agree that the A-10 is not the future, that still does not answer what fills the gap in the present, unless you've been eyeing the OA-1K Skyraider 2, or think the F-35 can pull off something like close air support, which is often the counter to this argument. But what really makes this story more interesting is that the Air Force itself has been making retirement harder while they try to retire it. For years, the service has spent real money keeping the A-10 alive, like when it invested about $880 million in upgrades, including re-winging them and avionics modernization. That's not really something you do with an airplane that you expect to walk away from soon. And then there are the newer upgrades. In 2023, the Air Force showed an A-10 carrying 16 small diameter bombs. This capability pushes the Warthog farther away from the old public image of just being a flying gun. The gun is still there, obviously, and nobody is going to stop talking about it, but hanging 16 GBU-39s under an A-10 turns it into a cheap, persistent, precision bomb truck with a lot more standoff, upwards of 60 miles, more than enough to be out of the range of manpads. Sadly, that does not magically turn the aircraft into a stealth fighter or make it supersonic. But what it does do is make the airplane more flexible and gives it some multi-mission chops that is always useful on the battlefield. Instead of only thinking about low, close gun runs, now you are talking about a platform that can carry a large pile of precision-guided weapons and stay in the area a long time. That is useful in exactly the kinds of dirty, prolonged operations the United States keeps getting itself into. And now there is the probe. And no, we are not talking about the Ford Probe, which was a front-wheel drive sports car that was intended to replace the Ford Mustang, and thankfully didn't. We're talking about fuel probes. Recently, the Air National Guard Air Force Reserve Command Test Center announced that it had rapidly fielded probe and drogue refueling capability for the A-10 in response to an urgent combatant command requirement. Normally, Air Force tactical aircraft like the A-10 rely on boom refueling from aircraft like the KC-135 or the KC-46. Adding a probe adapter means the A-10 can also take fuel from drogue-equipped tankers, including C-130 derived aircraft. In plain English, that gives commanders more options and makes the jet easier to keep in the fight when the ideal tanker is not available. But the strongest argument for keeping the A-10 is still combat. During Operation Epic Fury, which is still ongoing as I record this on April 22nd, A-10s were used in the Strait of Hormuz against Iranian fast attack boats and other targets. That mission surprised some people, but it shouldn't have. The Warthog has trained for maritime attack roles before, and when you think about the kind of target involved, the fit makes sense. Small boats, cluttered littoral waters, fast-moving threats, a need for persistence, and the value of an aircraft that can loiter and hit hard without burning through the same kind of cost and demand as more advanced fighters becomes obvious. There were also reports of A-10s doing really long gun runs against Iranian-backed militias in Iraq that were launching drones. Now that is an important reminder that the A-10's usefulness is broader than the internet version of close air support. The jet was built around supporting troops on the ground, but the traits that make it good at that mission also make it useful for a range of lower-end, messy, politically controlled fights where commanders want something with a big presence, and the A-10 has that. If you served in Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria, you know exactly what we are talking about. Warthogs were regularly used in show-of-force missions where they just fly really low where potential enemy fighters were to try to convince them to just chill the f*** out. The other uncomfortable truth here is that the United States just can't help but get itself into the kinds of fights that the A-10 is really good at. The Air Force wants to prioritize a future war.
What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Here's the part of this war that Russian propaganda really does not want ordinary people to understand. Every burning oil terminal, every damaged village, every displaced family, every missing housing certificate and every broken promise from Moscow has a price tag. And now, that price tag is landing directly on Russian citizens themselves. Ukraine has recently launched drone strikes at oil loading terminals across Russian port cities, as well know, such as for example Ust-Luga and Primorsk, and the fire at Ust-Luga specifically was reportedly even visible from Estonia and captured by satellite images. But the Kremlin's real problem is not only reduced oil loading capacity or lower export revenue, even though this hurts a lot as well. The real problem is that port infrastructure costs serious money to repair, and Russia's budget is already being squeezed by the massive level of war spending. And this is where the Kursk region becomes so important, because it shows what happens when war damage is no longer just something Russia creates somewhere else, but something Russia must now pay on for its own territory. The Ukrainian army entered the Kursk region, as we guys remember, August 6, 2024, and even at the height of that fighting, the area under Ukrainian control was only mere 5% of the entire region, including several dozen villages and the town of Sudzha, home to approximately only 5,000 people. In other words, this was a very small piece of territory in a country of 146 million people, the biggest country in the world, and yet official estimates put the infrastructure damage in Kursk at 700 billion rubles, not including the cost of combat operations, equipment losses, or the broader human economic consequences, which means that the real total moves towards something closer, much like 1 trillion rubles or even more. So today, let's talk about what the Kursk refugee...
You're already being replaced, you just haven't noticed it yet.
Artificial intelligence was sold as a harmless assistant, a tool to make life easier, work faster and smarter. But they are quietly learning how to do your job. While you were saving time, AI was learning to replace you. Tech bosses want to usher in a so-called intelligence age, where machines will take on all the hard, boring, dangerous work. Humans, meanwhile, will be free to chase exciting new opportunities. But beneath that shiny promise lies a darker truth. Behind the scenes, your skills are being erased, your experience worthless, your future already written, and it doesn't include you. This is the OpenAI lie, and if it succeeds, it won't just change work, it will break society. Chapter 1: The Death of the Resume. The working world has changed, but one thing has always stayed constant: the resume. Every line, every achievement, every late night and early morning is proof that you fought to get where you are. It's more than a piece of paper, it's your story. You rely on it to open doors, to earn respect, to claim the opportunities you've earned. And now it's under attack. Sam Altman and the other Silicon Valley CEOs don't care about your skills that you've spent years mastering. They'll be meaningless once AI agents have already learned them. The subjects you've paid thousands to study in college won't impress anyone when large language models can recite every detail on demand. The hours that you've poured into climbing the corporate ladder mean nothing against an all-powerful, all-knowing AI that operates around the clock. It can do anything you can do, faster, cheaper, and more efficiently. This is the future that OpenAI and other companies are racing toward building, except they don't see it that way. To them, the rise of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is something to celebrate. This next-level AI won't just assist, it'll think like a human. It'll move seamlessly from one industry to another, solving problems and, in OpenAI's own words, outperforming humans at most economically valuable work. In other words, anything people can do, AGI will be able to do better. And this isn't some far-off science fiction dream, it's a countdown that began in 2024. OpenAI expects to achieve its aims by 2030, and Sam Altman could not be more excited. In his own manifesto shared online in a September 2024 blog post entitled The Intelligence Age, Sam Altman says, "I believe the future is going to be so bright that no one can do it justice by trying to write about it now. A defining characteristic of the intelligence age will be massive prosperity." He talks about fixing problems that have plagued mankind for generations, of achieving things that humanity has only dreamed of, fixing the climate crisis, creating colonies in space, making game-changing breakthroughs in science. He also tries to calm any fears about AGI, claiming history always replaces old jobs with new ones whenever technology advances. But this time it won't be so simple. Jobs won't be replaced or lost, they will just change. He adds that he has no fear that we'll run out of things to do because people have an innate desire to create. AI will allow us to amplify our own abilities like never before. Altman sells his vision well, but look closer, and the cracks are clear to see. Let's say Altman gets what he craves and AGI takes over all that economically valuable work. What happens to the graduate, the white-collar worker, the entry-level employee struggling to just get a foot on the ladder? Well, they don't.
And we're back.
Fit into OpenAI's vision of the future. Because if a machine can do the work of a junior associate or entry-level employee for a fraction of the price, then that employee is no longer an asset, they're a liability. Altman wants to frame this as liberation, a world where humans can pursue creativity while machines handle all the boring work. They claim to be building a tool that will both empower and outperform humanity. Do you see the problem? Those two ideas can't realistically coexist. You can't empower a worker by making their core skill set entirely obsolete, and you can't build an economy by removing the ways people actually earn money. OpenAI's 2030 AGI prediction suggests the software to power it must already exist, but the hardware, that's a different story. Chapter 2: The Mathematical Mirage. The AI world lives and dies by scaling laws. Basically, if you add more data and more processing power, what they call compute, AI gets smarter and more capable.
In theory, there is no ceiling to this. Companies can just keep feeding it more data, more compute, year after year, watching their models reach new levels of genius. OpenAI has already admitted that AGI will take enormous amounts of resources. Altman has spoken about buying up vast amounts of energy and chips to build massive computer clusters. The goal is to drive down the cost of computation until it becomes effectively unlimited, abundant, cheap, and everywhere. Again, it sounds perfect, almost utopian. But it's an illusion, a pipe dream. To power its AGI revolution, OpenAI is going all in on the so-called Stargate project. It's a joint venture to build a whole new AI infrastructure for OpenAI in the US. They're starting with an eye-watering $100 billion poured into a massive supercomputer cluster. And that's only step one of the long-term Stargate vision, which is eventually set to cost $500 billion by 2030. And that's because AI is insatiable. It's always wanting more data, more resources, more power. According to some experts, if OpenAI
Morrison's manager fired for tackling violent serial shoplifter blown away by protest outside store, but accuses former bosses of blanking him as they watched on nearby. Now, if you are in the process of committing a crime, people are allowed to tackle you to the ground and they're allowed to hold you there until the police come. Right? I used to do it, I did security, but I never did retail. I did one retail contract and it was only because my boss fucking begged me. Right, and it's just retail's not fun. Retail security, absolutely not fun. You're rolling around on the floor with junkies and you have no idea what little pokey and pricky things they've got in their pockets. Right, it's an absolute nightmare. You don't want to be doing retail. However, this person was brave and tackled a shoplifter to the ground so that the man could be brought to justice, and his reward was he was fired. Fired for tackling the shoplifter. A Morrison's manager who was sacked for tackling a violent serial shoplifter said he has been blown away by supportive protests outside the store, but accused the supermarket bosses of ignoring him. Sean Egan, 46, worked at the Aldridge store near Warsaw for 29 years, but was fired after intervening during an abusive altercation with a prolific thief who stole good last December. I don't know what that's supposed to be. 29 years and he actually helped out and you fired him. That's his pension and everything. That is disgusting. Morrison's bosses...
Yeah, that's pretty...
Morrison's bosses fired him at a disciplinary hearing for not following the company's deter and not detain policy, even after the shoplifter became aggressive and started spitting at him. The employee from Wolverhampton, who had worked for the company since he was 17, said he and his family are now struggling to survive, with his last paycheck coming through in January. The father added that it has been difficult to move forward from the dismissal after being so invested in his work. Mr. Egan has been branded a hero by local shoppers, and dozens gathered outside the Aldridge store on Saturday demanding his reinstatement. Well, because the police are not fucking doing enough. That's why these guys, the police aren't doing anything, and then you've got the, shops going, oh... Here we go again. AI deletes entire company database and all backups in 9 seconds. Then cheerfully admits...
China may have just revealed one of the weapons it plans to use to attack and take over Taiwan. The People's Republic has converted its most distinguished Cold War fighter jet, the Shenyang J-6, into a supersonic, autonomous drone. And it may be planning to use it in one of the world's most notorious territorial disputes. The J-6 was initially retired after nearly 70 years of service, but it officially made a return at a Chinese airshow in 2025. The unveiling of the upgraded J-6W confirmed long-standing suspicions. China has been systematically modernizing its retired Cold War-era hardware. Unlike its predecessor, the J-6W is designed for one-way kamikaze-style missions. Beijing has deployed hundreds of these cost-effective UAVs to bases within operational range of Taiwan. For decades, security experts have theorized that the Chinese Communist Party is planning to invade Taiwan in what would be the largest military operation in recent history, exceeding the scale of Russia's attack, even on Ukraine. Although China maintains a vast arsenal and has the world's largest military, it has not engaged in large-scale combat for decades. The return of the J-6W may just hint at its battle strategy: to deploy thousands of crafts to overwhelm and degrade Taiwan's defenses. But is this really the rationale behind China's decision to upgrade its old aircraft fleet? And why did Beijing choose to reveal this program now, after decades of running it secretly? Now, to understand why the revival of the J6 is such an important milestone, we need to look back at its origins. The Shenyang was inspired by the Soviet Mikhail Gorovich, or the MiG-19. This was a supersonic fighter jet developed in the 1950s and codenamed Farmer by NATO. This aircraft wasn't just fast and aggressive, it was designed to break the sound barrier in level flight. The MiG-19 had a relatively short service life in the USSR. It was mainly used for interception and border patrol duties rather than in combat. However, China valued the aircraft's agility, cannon armament, and turning performance. In 1958, as part of the Sino-Soviet alliance, Moscow transferred all production rights of the MiG-19 to Beijing. And this is where our story really kicks off. China began manufacturing its version of the MiG-19, which it called the Shenyang J6, at around the time Mao Zedong's government launched the Great Leap Forward. It produced these fighter jets at an aggressive rate, churning out thousands, more than the Soviets ever did. From the 1960s to the 80s, Chinese engineers produced over 3,000 Shenyang J6 jets, and they soon formed the backbone of the Chinese People's Liberation Army Air Force. The J6 improved on the MiG-19 with notable changes that revolutionized the aircraft and made it popular. Starting with the engine, the Chinese produced the Li Ming Wopen 6 or WP6 engine by reverse engineering the two Tumansky R9 turbojet engines used by the MiG-19. The Soviet MiG-19 twin engine, nicknamed Widowmaker, was known to be unreliable and prone to exploding, killing many pilots, hence its name, the Widowmaker. Who would fly in that? Initially, the Chinese alternative was not any better. It took years for Chinese engineers to improve and perfect their WP6 engines. Each WP6 engine generates 29.42 kilotons of dry thrust and about 36.78 kilonewtons with afterburner activation. The MiG-19 originally featured NR-30 30mm cannons, but Beijing replaced them with indigenous Type 23 to 23mm autocannons, offering better firepower and integration with Chinese-made processors and ammunition. Other J6 variants were made with two Type 23-2 wing cannons and a Type 31 cannon in the nose, firing at 850 rounds a minute. Chinese engineers had to overhaul the MiG-19's radar system without Russia's technical support. Relations between the two countries had somewhat soured at that point. This forced China to develop its own airborne radar systems from scratch, and it eventually integrated one of its first domestically designed airborne radar systems into the J6. Besides these improvements, Beijing retains the core of the Soviet design and performance capabilities. The J6 features the same MiG-19 airframe design. That includes its unique swept wings with large boundary layer fences, a single vertical tail fin, dual engines, and a distinct nose-mounted air intake. The specs of the Shenyang J6 were state-of-the-art in the 70s and 80s. Variants of the J6, such as the F6, which China designed for export, became a regular fixture in many conflicts of the era: the Vietnam War, the Indo-Pakistani War, the War of Attrition, as well as regional disputes in Egypt and the China-Taiwan border. By the 1990s, the J6's capabilities were outdated, rendering it obsolete as a frontline fighter. China had already begun producing newer aircraft such as the J7 and J8, which started to replace the J6. The transition accelerated when China acquired the Su-27 from Russia. As China's first true fourth-generation fighter, the Su-27 demonstrated the significant gap between modern standards and the somewhat aging J6. All these factors led to the decline of one of China's most famous aircraft. By the late 90s, the Chinese Communist Party started the large-scale retirement of the J6s. Many were removed for active service and flown into museums and storage facilities. However, instead of turning them into scrap, Chinese authorities quietly decided to repurpose these jets into modern drones. Right, so now you know the history of the Shenyang jet. So how did China turn this obsolete craft into the vanguard of next-generation warfare? For decades, Western security researchers reported suspicious activities involving China's grounded J6 fleets, but they couldn't pinpoint Beijing's exact plans. Recent satellite images show a concentration of aircraft resembling J6s assembling near the Taiwan Strait. This was followed by reports that China had repurposed these jets into drones in preparation for war with Taiwan. It was at the Changchun Air Show in northeast China in 2025 that the veil of secrecy was finally lifted. A jet that still looked like the J6 emerged, but it was completely different in every other way. The plane, dubbed the J6W drone, retains the same basic swept wings and twin-engine layout as its predecessor, but it features numerous changes. Most notably, the original J6 was designed for air-to-air combat and interception. The J6W is designed for expendable, kamikaze-like missions. One of the first noticeable differences in the J6W drone is its cockpit. All pilot interface equipment, including controls, canopy, and ejection seats, has been removed. In its place, an autonomous flight control system, autopilot, and terrain-matching navigation technology. The J6W also features advanced communications technology. Analysts believe data link equipment may have also been added to its body to enable the drone to easily receive and transmit data. Another notable change to the J6W is the removal of the three 30mm cannons that made the J6 threatening. Chinese engineers freed up weight and volume by removing these cannons, which together weigh about 197 kilos. This obviously makes the drone lighter and therefore faster. China upgraded the J6's original radar from the 1950s too. They replaced it with a modern autopilot system that uses terrain-matching navigation technology, comparing the flight path against detailed digital maps. This allows the J6W to fly pre-programmed, low-altitude routes while hugging the terrain to avoid radar detection.
back. We've got 12 more to do or so. Let me get this done. We're doing this thing. Been doing a lot of bowling. It's been fun. You'll have to experience it for yourself next time.
And it still maintains the J6's Mach 1.3 supersonic capability. The Chinese Communist Party even improved the J6W's payload capacity by adding wing pylons. This increased the load to about 450 kilos of bombs. With these upgrades, the J6W can carry a range of weapons, older Chinese air-to-air missiles like the PL-9 and PL-5, runway cratering bombs, and unguided rockets. Converted from a gunfighter to a bomb carrier, the J6W can even carry anti-ship missiles. Although the world only discovered the J6W in 2025, the drone has been operational for decades. According to China's Ministry of National Defense, the J6 UAV made its first successful flight as far back as 1995. Now this is where all of this becomes somewhat worrying. You see, according to satellite imagery confirmed by the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies in March 2026, China has deployed over 200 J6W drones to 6 bases near the Taiwan Strait, 5 in Fujian province and 1 in Guangdong. What's alarming is that these Chinese bases are directly facing Taiwan across the strait, and they are well within the J6W's range. The Taiwan Strait is about 180 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The J6W has an operational range of 700 kilometers. That means China can hit Taiwan in under 10 minutes with the J6W launched from any of its bases. Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies recently confirmed that a fleet of J6W drones, along with modern J6D multi-role fighters, has been assembled at several Chinese bases facing Taiwan. Just before we continue, a word from our fantastic sponsor, AG1. Look, I've been trying to fix my mornings recently, not in a dramatic way, just making them, a little bit more consistent. And one thing that I've stuck with is AG1. It's basically one scoop, you take it from the pack and you put it in here, you shake it up, it takes about 30 seconds, and that is how it becomes a part of your routine. It covers a bunch of things. Tastes good too. Nutrition information all the back, supports gut health, immune health, and just keeping things consistent when your schedule isn't. And my schedule is often a mess, so I find this a great way to get everything that I'm almost certainly missing from not eating a very balanced diet. One scoop You shake it and you're good to go. If you want to try it, just go to drinkag1.com/intotheshadows and they'll include a flavor sampler plus a bottle of vitamin D3 plus K2, which I've got right here with your first subscription, which is about a $72 value. It's an easy addition if you're just trying to keep your routine a bit more consistent. And now back to today's episode. Chinese fishing vessels are using enslaved North Koreans for forced labor. And yeah, you heard that right. In blatant violation of international law, a 2025 bombshell report by a human and environmental rights group, the Environmental Justice Foundation, revealed the shocking details in a mass campaign of maritime modern slavery. These people work day after day on deep-sea fishing vessels, hauling in millions of fish that find their way to our plates around the world. The companies rake in the dough, but the North Koreans absolutely don't. They're forced to endure back-breaking manual labor, suffer constant abuse, and are moved from ship to ship so that this evil scheme can be hidden away. They're trapped, and some of them have been trapped for up to a decade without ever stepping on dry land. The report states that North Korea's fishing slavery program, quote, constitutes forced labor of a magnitude that surpasses much of that witnessed in a global fishing industry already replete with abuse. So how has this industry been allowed to fester for years? What are we just starting to learn about the scope of these practices? And is there anything that can be done to stop it? Let's find out. So then, how does this whole system even work? Well, it starts with China. The Middle Kingdom is the largest seafood producer in the world, and it's not even close. The nation produced a total of 88.6 million tons of the stuff in 2022. The next closest was Indonesia with 22 million tons. When it comes to fishing, China harvests more than the next 12 countries combined. If you look at websites that track ships, you'll often see huge hordes of Chinese fishing vessels in places like the Indian Ocean, out in the Pacific, near South America, and of course, the South China Sea. China's fishing fleet conducts 44% of global fishing activity, with 57,000 active vessels on the water at any one time. This Chinese fleet of commercial fishing boats operates in 90 different countries' waters, with Chinese firms also owning or operating terminals in 95 separate ports across our planet. China's deep-sea fishing fleet, those trawlers that catch masses of fish out in deep open water, is also the largest in the world. The exact number of deep water vessels is a bit hazy because China has a lot of illegal shipping as well that's harder to track, but Beijing estimates that it has 2,700 distant water fishing ships, but this figure does not include vessels in contested waters. Public records and satellite imaging suggest that the fleet is closer to 6,500 separate deep water fishing vessels. This armada of far-flung fishing frigates is utilized for several reasons: to make money, to provide food as proxies for military surveillance, and to extend global influence via an imported commodity. Living on one of these boats as a sailor for months at a time is grueling work, but some of the crew working on them are not what they seem. In fact, they're not really working at all. They are slaves from North Korea. Yes, our latest spin on the wheel of unimaginable horrors has once again landed squarely on North Korea, the so-called Hermit Kingdom, where human rights violations are more common than a nutritious meal. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, a title which would be a bit like calling me full head of hair Whistler, has had a long, friendly, and occasionally rocky history with the government in Beijing. Despite Pyongyang keeping the country on lockdown for its citizens pretty much 24/7, some people under certain conditions are allowed to leave the country. There are a lot of purposes to doing this, from spying, stealing, getting an education in something valuable to the regime, or even targeted assassination efforts. This used to be done on a smaller scale. However, in recent years, the Kim dynasty has been getting more comfortable shipping its citizens off to far-flung shores for something a bit more bog standard: labor. North Koreans have been found in a multitude of countries across the globe, usually doing some kind of unwanted task in regime-friendly nations in exchange for money, most of which the North Koreans themselves never actually see. North Koreans have been found on construction projects in the Gulf, building statues in Africa, working in factories in China, and even on the battlefields of Ukraine, just to name a few. What was revealed in a report by the EJF in 2025 shone a new light on a particularly cruel practice. North Koreans are undergoing forced labor on Chinese fishing vessels. We don't know exactly when it started, though the EJF's report began investigating the matter in 2017, and this makes sense. Back in 2017, the international community came together and sanctioned the hell out of North Korea with a new wave of economic measures aiming to hurt the country financially. As part of these sanctions, it was illegal to give work permits to North Korean nationals, and it completely banned UN member states from acquiring seafood originating from North Korea or from its citizens. In reality, though, nations friendly to the regime have openly flouted these sanctions ever since they came into into effect. Up to 100,000 North Korean workers are reported to be in China in various sectors, although the 2017 sanctions effectively forced the North Korean supply chain somewhat underground. We can hazard a guess as to how North Koreans end up on these ships. The regime needs money, and the Chinese need workers for their giant fishing industry, so it was a match made in hell. North Koreans already in China could be easily transported onto the Chinese ships and made to work, whilst others may have begun by leaving North Korea on a vessel flying a flag of convenience before then being later transferred to a Chinese trawler. Nobody would ever notice a few North Koreans amidst the sheer volume of fishing traffic. Either way, we can only assume that the North Korean citizens aren't exactly volunteering to go. Chinese fishing vessels are often not just staffed purely by Chinese fishing crews. Among them are many peoples from across Asia, but mostly it's Indonesians, Filipinos, and of course, as we now know, North Koreans. But the real horror about this isn't necessarily the setting or even the forced labor. No, passing of time is so much more cruel. Most commercial fishermen stay on vessels for a few weeks or a number of months at an absolute maximum. But the North Koreans, according to the EJF report, spend years on these ships. In some cases, North Koreans may have spent up to a decade on board these vessels without ever going back to North Korea, and some without even setting foot on dry land. Years upon years, not knowing anything other than backbreaking labor, horrible conditions, cramped quarters, unpredictable weather, and the constant sway of the ocean. One interview with one of the Indonesian crew who had served on a ship with these North Koreans stated, quote, "They, meaning the North Koreans, were not as free as the Indonesian crew. They went to the store in Mauritius one day to buy supplies. The captain told them that they could only go that one day. Afterwards, they were not allowed to go outside." Now this tells us that the North Koreans were likely paid something in order to do this endless labor, but if North Korean labor standards are anything to go by, up to 90% or more of their pay is likely wired straight back to the regime. They earn just enough to keep themselves fed and alive, but not enough to ever dream of being able to escape. The Landsmark EJF report drew on testimony from crew members who were kept anonymous by the organization, and in total they gathered anecdotes from 19 Filipinos and Indonesians who worked alongside the North Koreans. They said that the North Koreans were passed from vessel to vessel to prevent them from returning to land, and during port visits, they're not allowed to leave the ship or use mobile phones. Captains, who were usually Chinese, would also try and conceal the fact that North Koreans were on board their ships, given that it was very illegal. Usually, whilst at sea, the North Koreans would be transferred to sister vessels before the ships were due to dock in a port in order to avoid maritime authorities. Every time, the North Koreans are forced to take all of their belongings with them. This is how they stay on the water for years on end. One of the crewmates said, quote, "Never did the North Koreans go to port. That's why every time we were about to enter the port, they asked for our help to buy their necessities or groceries. They asked us to get this and that and gave us the money." End quote. But it's important for the captains to be cautious. If they are found with North Koreans on board, they could be fined or even arrested. In 2022, 6 North Koreans and a Chinese boat captain were arrested in Mauritius for allegedly refusing to report the North Koreans' entrance to the country. One can't imagine the Kim dynasty taking kindly to such transgressions. But here's a question. These guys are stuck on Chinese ships, most of the time away from the Kim regime's prying eyes. So why not try and escape? Well, as much as some likely do try, most probably have a greater reason not to. For one, when they're kept on the water and not even allowed near a port, swimming isn't exactly an option. I mean, it's not like the dear leader is holding swim with the Kim lessons every Sunday at the local rec centre or anything, and fishing waters are notoriously choppy. So, when you don't know how to swim, your chances at doggy paddling miles to shore aren't exactly good, especially once the shoreline disappears over the horizon. Even if they did try to flee via the water, they would likely be chased down and picked up, probably by another Chinese fishing vessel in the area. And then all you've done is trade one prison boat for another. There's always the chance that another prisoner rats you out in order to curry favour with the regime too, so it's hard to trust anybody with escape plans either. And who knows, attempted escapees could see themselves shipped straight back to North Korea, where they'd likely be imprisoned and then executed alongside their family. So swimming probably isn't a great plan. What about running away? Well, if you do get to shore, maybe you could run from a port and disappear into any of the urban sprawls you visit, right? Well, no, not really. Ports, as the most important trade infrastructure on the planet, are some of the best guarded places on Earth. even if an escapee succeeded, they'd still have no resources to survive, and they'd still have the risk of one day being found out and sent back, not to mention the whole "your family will probably be executed if you escape" thing. On at least one occasion, North Koreans did actually make it to port, but were subverted by port authorities when they were attempting to jump a fence. But believe it or not, one reason for them not escaping might be because depending on the type of person you are, it might not have been the worst deal, all things considered. According to one Indonesian interviewee, the North Koreans actually got some benefits relative to other sailors. He stated, quote, "The Korean crew got special food. Besides, they would not be scolded when they were sitting. While the Indonesian crew got scolded for having cigarettes and sitting, all crew members were supposed to pull up the buoys, but the Korean crew did not want to do it. The Koreans did not want to work to roll the fishing line and pull the fish either." One can't comprehend that level of defiance going on within the country itself. So if you can stomach being on the water 24/7 and the back-breaking work, the small dose of extra freedom genuinely might be worth it, which does say a lot about living in North Korea, doesn't it? Crew members reported that they mostly got on well with the North Koreans, and both the Indonesians and the Chinese would admire their hard work. One interviewee even mentioned that one particular North Korean was so well trusted that he was allowed to steer the ship and even take over from the Chinese crew so that they could sleep. The Indonesians and North Koreans bonded through teaching each other their languages and sharing food with one another. The Chinese got on with the North Koreans and treated them reasonably well, with them able to converse in Mandarin. Some can also avoid doing military service by working for the state instead. One Indonesian fisherman told The Guardian that, quote, "Some of the North Korean crew told me that they work on Chinese fishing vessels to escape from military conscription. There are only two choices: to support the government by working in plantations or a government enterprise, or to work abroad on Chinese fishing vessels." Definitely a bit of a rock and a hard place. However, this meager existence, carving out a tiny morsel of freedom, is the very best case scenario. If you worked hard and kept your head down, you might be able to save a small amount of money and survive off of local food. It wasn't much, but it might have been seen as more favourable to some than the prospect of starvation back home. But other interviewees told a different story about the North Koreans, about what it was like to work with them under more stressful conditions. As we mentioned, some chose not to do certain work, but most of the time the North Koreans worked extremely hard and had very little choice in the matter. They suffered pretty regular physical and verbal abuse. Fatigue was extremely common and often resulted in injuries which the senior crews would not have much sympathy for. The North Koreans were also often deceived in relation to wages, and specific documents were withheld from them often. And above all that, when their contracts were up, the crewmen would state that the North Koreans just weren't allowed to go home. They were just moved from one ship to another, and their nightmare lived on. The North Koreans, for their part, gave as good as they got. They were often seasoned veteran fishermen by the time that they had spent the best part of a decade on the water. They worked hard, they worked quickly, and they had no time for stragglers. And it seems on some ships this caused a lot of tension with newer crewmen who were unable to do things efficiently. One stated, quoting, "The Koreans often did that threatening behaviour to me. They threatened to throw me in the ocean because I was an inexperienced crew member. They bullied me. They threatened me using a fish gaff and bottle," end quote. Another spoke about the cultural differences with Korean directness, quoting again, "When Indonesians felt annoyed, we could hold it. We wouldn't directly talk about it. We held it first. Just let it be." They were different. If they were annoyed, they would directly talk about it. If they couldn't talk about it, they would try to pick a fight. "I fought with a North Korean. My head was bleeding, and he threw an iron bar at me," end quote. Direct, indeed. Violence was unfortunately pretty common for all sides here, and brawls would break out between the North Koreans and the Indonesians mostly. Of those the EJF interviewed, 100% of them, every single crew member reported abusive working and living conditions. 96% reported excessive overtime, and 55% reported physical violence. Grudges can build up for some time, and on a crowded vessel, there was no release valve. The North Koreans also certainly knew how to commit acts of violence. One, in fact, was seen pictured in EJF's report, acting as an armed bodyguard and holding an AK-47 style rifle. David reportedly shot at a Somali fishing vessel following a standoff between the two ships. The Indian Ocean in particular is a modern pirate haven, and so vessels often needed armed bodyguards to stop themselves getting victimized, but it was certainly a brave decision to give the North Korean a gun when he's essentially a captive. And sadly, some North Koreans have reportedly died on these ships too. Between 2017 and 2023, 4 deaths were reported by interviewees on board Chinese tuna longliners, including one man who reportedly took his own life by throwing himself overboard. There are likely many, many more. But eventually, most of them will get to go home at some point. It could be in a week, it could be in a month, or a decade, but eventually they will have paid their dues, and they will get to go home to North Korea. And yet, according to the crewman in the EJF report, the North Koreans were excited to go back. Quote, "When they heard the news of going home, they were excited. Since they had never stepped foot on land for 8 years, he, a North Korean, couldn't even sleep. The morning of the next day, when a boat was there to pick them up, they were very happy. End quote. They were picked up by a vessel with a Panamanian flag, an interesting detail which may tell us something about how they arrived on the fishing ships in the first place, and then they headed for the Korean peninsula. One question comes from all this though: why? What is the true purpose behind this campaign of maritime slavery? While some of the money that the Chinese are giving to Pyongyang in return for their voluntary workforce goes towards the survival of the regime, it's suspected that the cash is used in part to fund North Korea's nuclear programs, fuel the nation's economy, and to keep the dear leader looking like a Bond villain who ate all the pies. But as a result of all of this illegal fishing and the money North Korea generates through it, there's very little sign of a paper trail. And look, it's a good idea not to write down your crimes, and it seems it's a lesson the CCP and DPRK have taken to heart. But the industry of this whole affair is really what's staggering here. It was estimated that North Korea made $120 million from this practice in 2018 alone. Do you really think it's gotten less sophisticated, widespread, and profitable since then? I mean, that's going to buy Kim Jong-un a lot of Oreos, isn't it? The thing is, the sanctions have effectively made China North Korea's only real customer of any note, especially in its territorial waters, which is illegal, but that sort of thing has never bothered Beijing. The whole setup now seems to allow North Korea to still make a ridiculous amount of money by finding a few nations just evil enough to accept slave labor for a fee. Worse yet, the system is actually openly advertised within China. An ad on the Chinese website Zhihu offers permits issued by the North Korean military for no-risk, high-yield fishing with zero catch limits. Although you'd be forgiven for being uncertain whether they're talking about the fish or the fishermen, as North Korea is all too ready to provide its people to help make money hand over fist. These schemes, where North Korea exchanges manpower for something Pyongyang needs, helps them buddy up to other authoritarian regimes like China and Russia, who are willing to purchase a form of slave labor that doesn't include their own citizens. That sort of thing is bad PR. The thing is, North Korean society are so secretive and closed off that these people are in effect the perfect slave labor force for these regimes because they're already invisible people. Nobody knows who these individuals are, how many there are, and what region of the country they're from. We almost know nothing at all. And if you can't know a thing about the North Koreans facing this every day, how are they ever supposed to find a way out of this predicament? Overlapping geopolitical interests involving one of the most important countries on our planet and their massive, economically vital fishing fleet means that nobody who would like to has any power to effect change here. They are simply stuck. They are well and truly on their own because most don't even know they exist to begin with. Of course, openly engaging with North Korea in this way brazenly flouts the legal frameworks put in place in other parts of the world and serves as a geopolitical jab from China that basically says, we don't care about your damn sanctions. Worse still, laws that have been put in place to stop goods produced by North Korean forced labor from entering global supply chains simply aren't working. Because China makes up such a massive proportion of the global fishing industry, it is believed fish that were caught by enslaved North Koreans have reduced commercial markets in Western countries. Several of the vessels found to be catching fish using North Korean slave labor were authorized to sell their hauls to global markets, including the UK, the EU, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. What this means is the regime's plan is sadly working as intended in seeking to dodge the sanctions. China has thousands upon thousands of fishing vessels all over the world, and not all of them will have North Koreans on board. But this works to Pyongyang and Beijing's advantage. Because as soon as fish caught by North Koreans is mixed with fish that isn't, it effectively becomes near impossible to trace. China, meanwhile, can blame the private fishing companies and even foreign recruiters while upholding plausible deniability over the whole thing. The end result of all of this is it allows China to sell even cheaper fish in an already valuable industry for it. And usually, this would be the part of the video where I say, but here's what can be done, before going into a somewhat lengthy diatribe about the various efforts being taken around the world to bring this evil practice to a close, but can't do that today, can I? Because major efforts to toughen the sanctions against North Korea were vetoed by the UN by, wait for it, China. It's almost as if the whole point of having a UN is moot when a small series of global superpowers can consistently block and ignore laws because they aren't in their individual interests or something. But what do I know? I just make YouTube videos. Another benefit for the likes of China in all of this is having grey zone actors like these fishing vessels conduct illegal forms of fishing. This can include fishing in another country's territorial waters where the host nation usually has exclusive rights, in restricted areas like nationally protected zones, or by snagging and butchering sea life that is illegal. One image from EJF's report showed the crew of one of the vessels with North Koreans on it removing the fin from a shark.
Shark fin soup is a popular delicacy in Asia that is largely legal, but finning, the act of removing a shark's fins and discarding the body, is coming under increasing legal scrutiny globally, with Western countries passing laws to help restrict the practice. However, its popularity upholds this cruelty and continues to endanger shark populations, and of course, all those shark fins fetch a pretty penny, don't they? 80% of the crew who were interviewed reported shark finning was an ongoing practice, and 59% reported the deliberate capture and injury of vulnerable marine megafauna. For sharks, it's for finning, while species like dolphins are attacked because they often try to eat fish that get caught in the nets. China's trawler fleet is probably the worst perpetrator of illegal fishing in the entire world, and it's actively helping push certain aquatic species to the brink of extinction. China, for its part, doesn't care. And in North Korea, the fish live better than the people do, so there's little chance for Pyongyang to mention it on their next quarterly meeting of Evil are Us. In a sickening way, this can also be considered a punishment for North Koreans, akin to something of a prison sentence. As we mentioned, some North Koreans probably enjoyed the very few benefits that were afforded them, but spending a decade on ships away from one's family would drive many to madness, especially as most do not know when they will see them again, if they will see them again, despite the few small creature comforts to this life. How messed up does the situation have to be for people to be excited to go back to North Korea? It says a lot about the appalling conditions on those ships and just how long the North Koreans are on board them. When a person can be disappeared so effectively into a system like this for years at a time, North Korea have effectively created a mobile forced labour camp spread out amongst oceans all over the world. Perhaps he said something about the regime that you shouldn't have. That means you might see 10 years without setting foot on dry land, if you're lucky. Okay then, so what can we actually do about this? The truth is not a lot, certainly nothing whilst China still has a stranglehold on the global fishing industry and Pyongyang in its back pocket. But a good start would be beginning with mandatory AIS transmission. This is the GPS system that allows for the global tracking of ships in real time. Enforcing this is pretty difficult, given all most ships have to do is turn their transponders off for a bit while they do their illegal activities. But if it could be done, say by ships having a mandatory tracker that is always on for insurance purposes, then it would help illuminate illicit Chinese fishing activities and allow ships that pick up North Koreans to be tracked and caught. Because, docking off the coast of North Korea might be a bit suspicious with your transponder blaring your location to the world. It's not a perfect solution, but it would be a start. Port authorities and states who know this is going on off their coasts also need to play their part to deter ship-to-ship transfers near their waters, and whilst they can't do anything about them, they may be able to monitor suspicious activity and share data that could eventually see those trawlers denied access to ports and denied licenses. Companies that are known to be engaging with these practices would probably need to be sanctioned, denied shipping insurance, or made to pay hefty fines, eliminating the profit incentive to do it in the first place. Perhaps Western countries could also develop a way to track fish shipments from suspect vessels, and if proven, those companies could be denied the right to sell to Western markets. But again, with China so critical in the global fishing trade, it's hard to see any significant strategies that Beijing couldn't influence, block, ignore, or just work around. And the reality is, this problem is a lot bigger than Chinese fishing trawlers. The whole industry is tainted with North Korean slave labor. North Koreans and Uyghurs are forced to work in seafood processing plants as well as in other steps of the supply chain. If you take away the fishing slavery, there's still those in the factories, and that is a much tougher nut to crack given it's enforced on the Chinese mainland. China remains a key destination for North Korean labor, with the country believed to host as many as 100,000 individuals currently working in various industries, including in the fish processing plants that export to the US and EU. As long as the relationship between North Korea and China is maintained, this program of forced labor is going to continue. China, of course, denies any wrongdoing. But China always does that. Following the publication of the EGF's report, China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian stated that, quote, China's relevant cooperation with North Korea is conducted within the framework of international law. That's a bit like insisting your house isn't a fire hazard when it's built out of dry leaves soaked in gasoline, but that ambiguity keeps the stalemate in place, which is exactly what Beijing wants. Steve Trent, the CEO and founder of the EGF, said it best, quote, the use of North Korean labor on board Chinese fishing vessels is a damning indictment of the failure to regulate our oceans. Illegal fishing and human rights abuses can be found almost without exception on board China's distant water vessels. However, the use of North Korean forced labor for such long periods is a particularly severe example of the egregious misconduct uncovered by the EJF. Ultimately, this phenomenon pulls back the curtain on the way the world really is, instead of what we want and hope it to be. It displays, more than anything yet again, that the North Korean government and its leaders show nothing other than a disgusting contempt for their own people, and it showcases that they see their citizens as nothing other than a resource to be harvested and sold to the
You going to the back? Oh. Well, on that, I think got a good stack done today, but I think I'm gonna have to call it for the night. It's getting late and I have to dad in the morning. So thanks for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful evening.